also key to improve freight movement in East County, alleviation of the pressures on the Altamont Pass, and our best chance of an extended multimodal transit corridor to add to the Bay Area transit network. The only east-west, well, that's pretty accurate actually, east-west alternative to State Route 239 is State Route 4. I cannot see the expansion of this route between Discovery Bay and Stockton as ever being feasible, either financially or ecologically. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any other speaker slips? Great. Then if not, I will bring it back to the authority for comments on items 1.2 and 1.3. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about the percentage allocated to bicycles, the particular projects proposed for East County, a little bit about BART. But if I could ask Ross one question just to grind. So my recollection is that when we started this allocation of money process in August of last year, we gave a preliminary allocation of the $2.3 billion to each of the 4 subregions. They came back with a series of project and program recommendations, and that formed the original. And then that's been amended to some extent by the money that was put in as a draft for the BART cars, and to some extent for this Community Development Investment Program. But other than that, do the allocations continue to represent the priorities of each of the 4 RTPCs or not?
Well, my judgment would be generally yes. Certainly, there was a great display yesterday in the Board of Supervisors packet that they probably should have put in as well. That was a side-by-side comparison of the RTPC proposals and what we had in the draft. Certainly, on a percentage basis, the funding for seniors and people with disabilities took the largest percentage reduction based on what the RTPCs recommended, and I think that's one we'll have to address. Certainly, one that we've discussed here quite a bit is the return to source, where there was a 25 to 30% request, and this version currently talks about 23%. I think the biggest point, and I think it's something you mentioned in a previous meeting, is we didn't ask the RTPCs to opine on any of the policy matters. So that's happening as they review the draft now. So general alignment, yes. New categories with the technology and the Community Development Incentive Program, and then some relatively proportional reduction to fund the categories that you mentioned, the BART and that CDI program.
And could you just remind us that when we did our most recent round of polling, what did the residents tell us were the things that were most important to them?
Yes, the 3 highest areas that came back through the polling, and this was back in February 2014. It was fix our infrastructure, so potholes and taking care of our existing infrastructure. It's BART, access to BART, better BART, more capacity on BART. And then we combined a number of things into a term. We're using traffic smoothing. People are tired of sitting in their cars when they're not moving at all or not moving quickly. So that's both combination of congestion on the highway and then on our arterials where we don't have the operation synced very well, so you're sitting at red lights often. So it's the traffic smoothing on highways and then better traffic flow on our local roads.
Great, thank you. And I know some of the speakers are leaving and getting late, but I just wanted to thank everyone who took the time to come out this evening to speak. It's very much appreciated to hear so many folks come out and talk to us and tell us what your impressions are. And now I'd like to get comments from authority members.
Chair Tatson, if you don't mind, what would be helpful if to get the feedback, maybe to break it down a little bit. One of the I should have said this earlier. One of the earliest version of the TEP went out without the preface in it, and then we added that and included it in your packet. So I think when we get the comments, that's one where we'd really like to get your understanding if we hit that right, because when some of the speakers talk about performance measures, et cetera, they're looking at the criteria and the goals outlined in that to be the basis for some of the criteria. So if we could comment on that first, and then maybe comment on more general on some of the funding categories.
Okay, so comment on the preface. Commissioner Abelson.
Yeah, number 7 under sales tax augmentation. There's some wording in
1.2-5, sorry.
right, excuse me. It has some really awkward wording that normally isn't used in discussing accessibility. And it's at the end of the sentence. First of all, the sentence goes on and talks about promoting, this topic is promoting accessible transportation. But then later on it says appropriate to their specific condition for access to the community. That doesn't really add anything, and it's kind of doesn't even sound right English-wise to me. And it isn't just to the community, it's period. In other words, it's not based on where you want to go, it's based on the disability. So if the sentence ended after the word disabilities, it seems to me it would be complete.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a wording thing.
I think that's a good comment.
That's my only comment.
Okay, and I just want to say, there's been a lot of talk about how we evaluate projects and programs, and it struck me that we put a lot of time into essentially the first paragraph that had the 3 points of what we're intending to do here, and then the goals. And I would just toss out that one way to think about whether a project or program achieves our purpose is it consistent, and does it help achieve the goals and preserve and enhance the quality of life of local communities, et cetera. Because if we said those are our overarching thoughts, then that ought to be the guide, at least to me, the basis on which we evaluate specific options. With regards to the 15 things listed below that, my initial reaction is that's too many. That is not a elevator speech. And the preface, in my view, needs to be something that's sort of more succinct. So even if it's keeping the 15 but trying to summarize into some 4 or 5 higher level categories with some subpoints, I think that would help. I have a hard time reading through this and having any sense of what I've read by the time I got through number 15. Maybe that's my age, but.
And some of these don't even include the critical points within, for example, under the disability stuff, that the main point is to provide transportation.
Okay.
So, and it's not there, I think. Where?
In number 7?
No, it says to promote it. Provide.
So you're saying provide. Okay.
Provide is the word I used.
So,
Bill and I were just chatting. If everyone agrees with the chair's comments, we could take that back and kind of distill that and bring it back next week if you'd like that approach.
Yes. Too many.
okay. I've heard one other too many. Commissioner Arnrich?
Yeah, I was just going to reinforce that I also think the RTCPs are trying to also comment on that. And if you, we were talking about, we've all worked on an ordinance or something. We have all the attorneys in the room. We're absolutely guaranteed we know what it says. 3 years later, you pull it out without remembering what you did, and you read it, and it doesn't say what you thought because you read into it, all of this. There are things in there that have nothing to do with our organization or what we do, not even in a high ethical standard. The RTCPs are looking at it, but we need a good editor who is not emotionally involved in all of these, just says, this is what our agency is, this is what we do, and within our growth management principles, write it so it's clear and concise. There are things in there, if you read it as a standalone, you're going, well, it has absolutely nothing to do with what we're doing. And that's going to get us sideways. It's going to be as diverse as what we heard tonight from people and what we're hearing on a daily basis, that we need to be a little bit more focused. And that's the point of getting that input, is to focus. So I hope we really come out with a cleaner, simpler version.
Commissioner Romick?
I agree with that also, and I'm also looking at the 6 goals that we have listed. And this is a transportation tax that we're looking to do here, and I think they should be in order of importance as they relate to transportation as opposed to promoting environmental sustainability, expand safe, well, I mean, just go through this process and rearrange it all so the top items on our goal list are related to transportation. And as we get further away from transportation, they're further way down in the list of how they're listed.
Other comments on the preface? Commissioner Black?
Well, I think I disagree with most of my colleagues here that if I were the czar of this whole thing, I would come up with a plan where our transportation funding would primarily support our sustainability goals. And I think that, a lot of the advocates we've heard from, are coming from there, but, the other half of them aren't. And, but from a practical standpoint, I realize that in the end, at the end of the day, that we've got to get the voters' support on this, or nobody's going to get anything. So that's way up there. And we also need to secure support from advocacy groups, or they're going to oppose it, and it'll be a problem also. The other thing that I see, and this came up when we talked about it at WICTAC, is that it strikes me that there's a huge amount of overlap in these various categories. And you could take any one category, and there are probably a half a dozen other categories that describe programs that could utilize the same funding. I mean, pull one out like, transportation for people with disabilities or whatever that category is. If you adopt performance standards, or even without performance standards, just complying with the law, the ADA and the building codes and other things, every time you build something new, you're going to have to build into it accessibility. You're going to have to build it to accessible standards. And so, having a separate category for that, I think that's fine, but it's just an example of where there's a huge amount of overlap. And when we discussed this at WICTAC, people were talking about, well, I want to pull out of this category and put over here, I want to create a new category. And I was the only one at WICTAC that voted against it because, I just thought at the end of the day, we need to maintain flexibility. And I think that's really important. And trying to design a program that's built around very specific programs and end uses is I think it's confusing, and it's going to continue to be.
So if I could just, for my own edification, ask you a follow-on question. So would you advocate, for example, fewer categories of expenditure but with more broader language, or more specific language for whatever categories
I think
we have?
the categories need to do two things. They need to attract the voter support you need, and they need to minimize potential, objections from advocacy groups. I think whatever makes the voters happy and makes those groups happy, that's what we want to do. But we want to build enough flexibility into it so that 20 years from now, when everything's changed, we can do what we have to do with the money, and we won't be stuck with building buggy trails or something like that.
Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah.
And Commissioner Durant.
I'd like to start out with I'd like to be perfectly clear on how we really address these issues, because they are not perfectly clear. I think every group out there has a point, and I think the flexibility of listening, but then the combination of how we put it all together will be pretty complex, but it also has to be clear to the voting public. We have to make sure that what we say, people are going to understand how we phrase it, the whole scene. So I totally agree. Break it down in the sense of lower, don't cross-reference. We need to really put it in a concise package. You make it too large, people won't read it, won't understand it, particularly me. I loved you going through all this, Ross, but by the time you finished, I forgot what you started with. And that's not a slam to you, but I think that affected everybody. So we need to bring it down, but also be clear in what we're saying.
Thank you, Commissioner Guerrero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me start by perhaps shocking Commissioner Butt. I agree with you on two points you raised. The first is that the transportation funding that we're looking at should support our sustainability goals. The big question is how. So I don't think that there's any disagreement, at least from my perception of this group, that that is something that we should be striving for. And in terms of how we talk about it, in terms of the goals, I think it needs to be incorporated in the goals, but as a broad statement, I think all of us want better goods movement, more efficient transportation system, better people movement, things that reduce friction and reduce greenhouse gases, but also, fundamentally make it easier and safer for people to get to work and to play and to do it on a variety of modes of transportation or with a variety of modes of transportation. The second thing is that I do agree that there is a huge overlap in the categories, which I find frustrating and confusing. For example, and I've said this in prior meetings, but I want to reiterate it, I don't know what the magic is to 5% with respect to pedestrian and bike and trail facilities, or how we got to the notion that that magic number means something, particularly in the universe where those same infrastructure improvements can also be, and frankly are also, incorporated in what our local cities do with respect to their streets today. Our Complete Streets program always incorporates pedestrian, bicycle, and trail facilities wherever there are trails, but certainly pedestrian and bike facilities where there aren't. And so the real question for me becomes whether the notion that 5% is somehow it's separated from what we do with the rest of our street improvements on a local level. I also recognize that there are cities that do better at this and that there are cities that do worse at it. And so there's a part of me that thinks that rather than have a sort of dialed in, locked in, line in the sand on 5% for a categorical countywide pedestrian, bicycle, and trail facility program, that maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. Maybe what we want to be doing is allocating portions of major streets and complete streets grants and local street and maintenance improvements in ways that make those kinds of dollars available to cities who are willing to invest in those ways. Because let me just be really sort of blunt in this. If we put more money into this as a category, and as much as I love Concord, if all of the money goes to Concord, because most of you who spoke on this are from Concord, I got a problem. My city does really well in this category. Why do I want to fund Concord doing it when they haven't so far to the same extent, if that's in fact true, right? So I think we kind of have to get past the line in the sand thing. Those of you who were here last time heard me say it. We're at the point in this process where we need to get past arbitrary lines, define what it is we're trying to achieve by them, and work toward making sure that we can fundamentally achieve what we're looking for. And I 100% support, doing all of the good things that we're talking about. I think bike lanes are great things. As I said, we've done in Pleasant Hill, we've done a great job adding them where we can. We made a huge effort and investment in doing it on Buskirk Avenue when we did that $9 million, $10 million project. And so I think there are ways, and I'll try to keep this brief, but so fundamentally I think part of this is that we're trying to slice the pie into too many small buckets and not trusting that on a local level, the local jurisdictions will do the right thing for the more regional infrastructure system. And so the big question for me would really come down to, as we sort of futz with the percentages, right? If we're gonna add to pedestrian, bike, and trail facilities, where does it come from? whose ox gets gored? Do we take it from local streets and maintenance improvements, which means that you might actually end up with fewer bicycle lanes and pedestrian facilities being funded from that particular bucket? I don't know that that's the better societal answer, but I think we need to get to the specifics of those and not just sort of staking territory on percentages. But otherwise, conceptually, I agree with those two points you raised.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Hudson? Chair Hudson?
Yeah, I don't want to get away from the preface, the initial draft. I think that's what you're on. I think everything that we need to say is in there. I just don't, to echo what you've heard before, I think you need to go back and, this is usually the point I dump it all on Don and say, whatever you tell me. I mean, between David and Don, they wordsmith, but it comes out right. So, I mean, why fool with it? After that, the comments on preface, I'd gladly jump into this, but I'd rather stay with the preface until we finish it.
Are there any other comments on preface before we then move on to the Commissioner Glover?
Thank you. I think that this is a good job and a great first start, but you heard a lot of comments tonight that really talked loudly about routes of significance, and 239 was brought up on many occasions from most speakers that spoke, and so I just want to make sure that we've heard that and that we take a close look at that as we go forward, because it's key to trying to garner the support that we're going to need from that region. It's going to be key and very important, as well as the fact, we have all the categories here has some tie to economic development, but not directly. An initiative that the Board of Supervisors has out there now is the Northern Waterfront. And we need to find a way, if it's incorporated in here somewhere, it doesn't stand out to me. And I think that we need to make sure that we're looking at that as a great opportunity, not for any particular region in the county, but the county as a whole. So those are two things that I'm very concerned about, and that we need to make sure that they're in here somewhere, because to be able to go out and generate the type of excitement around this measure, I got to have some tools to work with.
Well, and since this is a measure where we're asking people to pay on top of what they're already paying, and you just love people who wordsmith things, but of those 5 goals or 6 goals, however we end up, I would start with the word enhance, efficient, safe, and reliable movement, growth, manage growth, enhance the management of growth, enhance, safe, convenient, and exportable. The way it's written now, it sounds like we either haven't done anything or we're going to just start doing it. And in order to, because that's going to be one of the criticisms, is we're asking for money on top of what we're already have asked for and have done well. But again, to make this grab the voter, they need to see that it's going to be more than what we've done. And I know, words get boring, but I always think the word enhance is, and you can come up with another one, but people have got to see that they're getting more than what they're already paying for.
Why don't we move on, or did you have another comment on the preface?
Yeah, it's very simple. When staff came to WICTAC originally, they talked about regional balance, and I believe it may have happened with all the groups. But when I get to this document, it's gone, or it's not here. So if we could add the words regionally balanced, perhaps in the first sentence or wherever somebody thinks it's appropriate, so that people throughout the county realize that there's regional balance going on, that would, I think, be helpful.
Thank you. Commissioner Simmons and then Commissioner Glover.
Yeah, Chair Tatson, I may take your initial suggestion a step too far.
Okay.
But the first 6 lines could easily be changed to that the augmentation is intended to provide a safe, efficient, and reliable transportation network. Enhance is fine. But I think the notion there is you want a tagline that you can talk to the voters about. It's got to be right at the front. And this is getting right into the weeds right away in that introductory paragraph. So That's just a suggestion for thinking about it.
Thank you. Commissioner Glover.
Thank you. I also want to mention that there was some dialogue that took place earlier on, and in particular from Supervisor Pifo, who spoke of the urban limit line and the discussion that took place at the Board of Supervisors. Was that?
Next agenda item.
Okay.
Hold your breath.
Okay.
We'll get there. Okay.
All right. So, speaking of that, I would like us to get to the urban limit line pretty quickly. So are there additional comments regarding the actual expenditures?
Yeah, Mr. Chair,
Okay,
I just have
so
one.
Hang on.
Sorry, okay.
Commissioner Arnridge, Commissioner Durand, Commissioner Peoples, Commissioner Hudson.
First. Oh, you're first. No. Okay, thank you. I think we're going to, I just got a letter tonight. I represent the 19 cities. It's interesting that, let me start out. First, I really appreciate all the comments we're getting, and I value those a lot because each one has a slightly different perspective. Even though we're getting some emails generated by one organization on behalf of people, that's kind of not, it's taken up a lot of time to respond, and you find out you're going to respond back, a short version of that. Real conversations are great. I have to tell you, one of the best conversations I've had with Dave Campbell here, to get to know him and understand on a one-on-one basis, and I know each of us have done that. Julie and all of us are meeting. I have another meeting with Dave Ramos here from County Connection. We really have an opportunity that we did $1 billion in Measure C, $2 billion in Measure J, and we had a $2.6, $2.8 billion shortfall when we had all the projects in Measure J, and we said we can't afford them all. And the opportunity now is to, and again, that was like, we know what the master plan was to how to make this a great community, a great county, and we couldn't do all of it. And we shouldn't lose sight that our real goal was how to complete that vision, and not just say, well, I'd like this now and like that. That's not a master plan. I mean, that's designed by committee. Being an architect and planner, I can show you what that looks like. We all have those ugly things in our communities. And the ones that absolutely stand out and those trail systems that work and get you places, those are because people sat down and did a master plan and create the connectivity. So I think the overarching thing we should remember is that really is our goal. We do have a very complex process sitting up here. It isn't just us voting on this. We each have to go back to the 19 cities and our county partners and get our fellow council and supervisor members to create a majority to vote individually to bring that back, because that's a requirement in the system. There are 75% of our fellow elected who aren't sitting here tonight who are against us funding one of our partners across the board. If it's in there, they're not going to support it. So we've got to figure out how to get around that. We have spent $1.3 billion to date just in East County and the Highway 4, $1.3 billion out of an entire program of $3 billion. So regional equity, yeah, that's a lot of regional equity. We have to, our job is to help balance that, because when we go back to our own voters and our own jurisdictions, we have to find with clear conscience that we recommend this and why and how it's going to benefit our community, as well as the greater good, right? I mean, we all believe in a regional approach, because I would like to get out to Brentwood to my friends to go buy us corn, although they sell it in our market, that we need that connectivity. And that's the master plan. And we have some real challenges if there are groups who want to show up and say, if you don't do this, I'm against that. That's not constructive. We all know that. I mean, we're not saying that. But by the way, I got to convince 4 council members in my community who are against funding one of our agencies. The same in the next city. And by the way, 4 of the cities are all in the same boat. So we got to do a lot of our own heavy lifting to get us to a point of a consensus, but still with a vision that we're doing the right thing and just not throwing money around because everybody deserves that. Agencies gave up, as a whole, our 19 cities gave up a lot, $1.3 billion to East County because of a horrendous, horrible problem. With all due respect, those people that lived there didn't create the problem, right? It wasn't the appropriate planning and the infrastructure links and all of that land use. It didn't work. So what can we do going forward? We're a transportation agency, the only one in the state of California that has a growth management element. We ought to be proud of that. And we ought to find a way to think about, and I said this last time, that our performance standards, I think, are really important on individual projects and categories, recognizing regional equity because it won't go through without that, but also recognizing that if those standards we were just talking about are really clear and straightforward, we have an AB 32, SB 375 requirement. We need to make sure we don't violate that we're honoring that, each of our communities. On the specifics of the each one of those categories, the wording in there, there are some serious issues in them that need to be changed. And you can see letters that are starting to come in for each of our jurisdictions says, you can't do this. The housing, trying to tie these dollars into building more affordable housing. None of us build housing. Let's be clear. None of us build housing. We each have general plans. We each have HCD compliance. Every single one of us. Some of us have general plans that are in place and will be there till 2030, and some are a little longer than that. We can't change those. Those are some are voter approved. So we have to balance all of that, so we can't come back with a transportation plan that has strings attached to it that prevents us of completing the master plan vision. And I don't want to change personally, and I don't think any city wants to sit here and tell the county, you have to do something. That's not how we got into growth management. And let's remember, it was a county urban limit line, right? Give the county credit. We all support it. The fact is, it was a county urban limit line that started. We need to honor that, and I know there's a lot of fear of these changes. They keep pointing to Bob about this, but bottom line is this is a master plan. Let's keep our eye on the ball. We need to compromise. We need to listen to everybody, and I think people have been fairly reasonable to date.
Thank you. So, I want to be polite to all my fellow commissioners. We can impose a 2-minute rule on our speakers. We could also impose a 2-minute rule on ourselves. Commissioner Durant.
That's fine.
So, all right. So I'm going to agree with everything that Commissioner Arnott just said. I think that was a right, rational, and even-handed way to say it. I think it's also important that we recognize that all of us are here because we believe firmly in a regional approach to trying to manage ourselves out of the challenges that we face. But I'm not in favor of a regional approach that sacrifices local control. And so I think just as I'm not in favor of state approaches that impinge on our county control, and I'm not in favor of federal approaches that encroach on our state and county control. So I think there's a real balance to be struck there, and it does feel occasionally like we wander too far from that. So I'd encourage us to not wander that far. The second sort of broader overarching point with respect to the funding categories is I think it's far more important to incentivize the behavior that we want and the management, whether it's of growth or something else that we want, than to sort of penalize and disadvantage. And the way that we structure things in terms of equity, I think, really still requires us to value the differences in the subregions and the differences between our cities, and continue to recognize that one size doesn't fit all, and frankly, 5 sizes don't fit all, because there's 19 cities plus the county, each of which wants to have its own personality, its own flavor, its own solutions to the unique problems that each serve, lest we go the way of looking and feeling and so on too much like, say, LA County, with all respect to my friends to the Deep South. But so I think those two things for me are the most important components of getting past sort of these things and working our way down into solutions.
Yes,
I'm glad to follow on with the commissioner because I agree with much of what he said. I think this plan fails to recognize the vast differences in different parts of the counties. I had a 72 operator come here today to talk to you about standing loads with 10-minute headways. And we put the 72R in on the weekends, drop the headways down to 7.5 minutes, and we still have occasional standing loads. That's, my guess is that's not true anywhere else in the county. And that's never going to be handled by autonomous vehicles. Our planning staff estimated that to carry the capacity that the 72 carries would take 800 vehicles driving up and down San Pablo. So I think you need to recognize that and need to recognize that particularly in West County, there's definitely a need for expanded bus transportation. I don't think WICTAC went far enough, but they went further than the countywide plan, and I think that's reasonable given the difference in land use and population density and population demographics in the different parts of the county.
Thank you. Commissioner Hudson?
Yeah, maybe this is a different take. I'm kind of going around it. I think the new measure transportation expenditure plan 1.2-9 really is very close. I think it's ready to go to the RTPCs, ready to even try and get some comments after the RTPCs to the cities. I think we're a lot closer than what I'm hearing here. And let me give you an example. If I talked to Dave too, he had to listen to me ramble, so I'll try and keep this, Dave Campbell, so I can keep this under 2 minutes. They're asking for 5% of pedestrian, bicycle, and trail facilities, so roughly you move from 60 million to 100 million. SWAT is 19%, and SWAT is putting in 24.7 million. I mean, we're already doing what they're asking for. And the reality is, as I pointed out, we'll pull a lot more from the 120 million local street maintenance and improvements to combine with that when we start coming up with the best projects. You have to look at each cost benefit. The other thing is, I think really as we get into this, we need to take a look at what these alternative scenarios are coming from MTC and ABAG, because I don't want to give away any funding if it's potentially there. We don't know which scenario it is, but we should get involved with it. Last, we heard a lot about 239 and the Tri-Link. I think that is an extremely important part of this plan. You heard people talk about truck traffic that was going through Byron. That is a minor part of the traffic that is going to East County. If you really want to see how bad it is, drive back from LA about 4 in the morning and go past Wesley, and you'll swear it's the largest city in Contra Costa County, in San Joaquin. It's nothing but trucks. And that is repeated several times in different areas as they come into the Bay Area, all on 580. You could sit at BART and count 15 trucks, 1 car, 15 more trucks. It's just over and over again. And then at 680, head north. The other thing that wasn't mentioned is they don't want growth inducing. Our environmentalists, I agree with you, but you're not going to stop Mountain House. That's another Doherty Valley that's going out in San Joaquin County, plus others that are close by that will be built up over the next 20 years. And there is a reverse commute out of Antioch that I didn't realize until I heard it from Don Freitas of about 10,000 people. And we're trying to get them to the lab, to Pleasanton, to San Ramon. I mean, this is a huge number of people on Vasco Road, which isn't exactly the safest road around. So what we're looking at is this is not just an East County problem. I know that the business park in my city tried to get buses to commute to Bishop Ranch, and we got turned down from the Air District because we didn't meet the cost-benefit analysis, et cetera. But I hope they go back into it because East County's not going to shrink, and San Ramon's not going to shrink, and the business park isn't going to shrink. And all you have to do is look at 580, and you'll know that there are a lot of problems out there that we're working on that aren't just Contra Costa.
So Commissioner Butt.
Well, you know, I know we're going to have to do it, but in terms of building 239 and all of these other road projects, after all the money we've spent from Measure J and the measure before it, people tell me what freeway has gotten better. None. They've all gotten worse. I heard one gentleman say, everyone is drowning in traffic. I mean, that's what happens, and you can't build your way out of it. Any improvement you make is temporary. Every time you build a new road or add a lane to a freeway, all you're doing is inducing growth and making it worse in the end. And so I realize we're going to have to do it. If we're going to have to allocate funds to build 239 to get the votes to do this thing, we got to do it. But I'll bet you if it happens 10 years from now, 15 years from now, it's just going to be worse. It's not going to get better. This building roads is not the solution to our transportation problems. It just makes it worse, not better.
Okay, Commissioner Romick, and then I'd like to end the discussion on this item.
Growth is coming whether we build roads or not. As I've stated a number of times here, the majority of affordable housing, market rate affordable housing, is being built in East County, for if not just Contra Costa, most of the Bay Area. So people are looking for some place to live as we grow as a community, as we continue to grow population-wise. Infill is happening, and infill is happening in East County. We can't ignore or take away options for transportation in East County. If we want to expand our economic vision and ability, we need to be able to grow. We need to be able to handle the traffic that we have today and tomorrow, and ignoring it isn't going to be the solution. And I'll end it there so we don't ramble much.
Well, thank you. So this is going to come back to us for continued discussion next week. To the extent that you have conversations with people in your region or other people around the county, and I'm sure everyone will, what I encourage everyone to do is to remember the variety of things we have heard tonight, because success only comes if we collectively find a way to put this on the ballot and get 2/3 approval. So we can't follow any given line of solution here and win. We still need some work to figure out where the middle ground is, and the people at this table are capable of figuring that out. But with that, why don't we go to the urban limit line?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would respectfully request that be put over till next week. We only have 20 minutes, and I just
Okay.
don't think it's going to get done. And, I thought maybe we should go to the next item, but we do have a meeting. I heard earlier that we may have a fourth meeting. I want to give it the time and the attention. We may get it done in 20, but we've guaranteed to all of us that we'd be out of here by 9 o'clock, and I just don't see that happening.
Okay. It's will of the committee.
But just a question, and maybe we don't talk about it, but I believe that the supervisors had a meeting on this. Could you at least share that? So that just in a objective, broad view, set the table so when we come back, we'll all have the same thought process.
Be happy
that
to
would
do
be
so,
okay.
and my
Chair.
colleague also. We did have a meeting yesterday just to go over what some of the concerns that have been raised by members of EPAC. The board is very clear. We do not feel there needs to be any change to the urban limit line. There's been no sprawl. There's been no abuse of it. We're still open to conversations around consistency relative to the variety of cities in the county having perhaps different language and or issues on acreage. We're open to the idea of no contiguous, hopscotch kind of thing, so that there's clarity and people feel assured there will be no abuse. But at this point, I think it's fair to say our entire board is very committed that we feel that the current urban limit line situation of 30 acres or less has not had a problem. We're all elected officials as our city counterparts, and that's what the public process is for. So Supervisor Pifo was here earlier. I don't wish to speak for her, but she made some very strong comments about how she will not support the TEP and this plan if there is I'm saying, and Ms. Vanderbrook Riley is here. I want to make sure I'm correctly quoting Supervisor Pifo, that, and I think the rest of us, but we're not going to go out there yet, but she won't support a TEP that has any changes other than those that retain local control. And we feel that we're in the middle of the 10-year review. That won't be completed until later this year. And we all go through those land use planning processes, and we feel that that is the appropriate place to handle urban limit line issues.
And if I could just summarize the staff report in less than a minute. If you look at page 1.4-3 and 4, it provides the data on how different jurisdictions currently work to amend their respective urban limit line. In summary, it says as 20 jurisdictions, we're all over the map. We don't have quite 20 different solutions, but we're close. And so that led to the recommendation that we at least make those consistent. And there are 3 components of that. One is that you'd be able to make at least one of the findings that's in County Measure L, which is in attachment 1.5, it's really 1.4 that was handed out today. The second, that we have some consistent findings regarding what a non-consecutive resolution is, and that's included in a letter from the county to the board back, board to the authority back years ago, and also in Brentwood and Oakley's exhibits at the back of that. And finally, the county and San Ramon require a supermajority vote, and so the third component would be that all jurisdictions would have a supermajority vote before they use the 30-acre exemption. And then there are other categories that are listed for discussion purposes. There's no recommendation. We could do those, we could not do those.
Thank you for doing something very good.
All right, is there any interest in taking up item 1.5? Or shall we just give ourselves credit for ending early this evening?
Well, I
and
read
discuss
the
whether we
staff
want to have
report,
any-
and it was just going to be I don't mean just. It was going to be a staff report. It's for information only. There was no action. I think we can do our homework.
Okay.
I did have a question.
Okay, well, let me go to Ross and then.
Well, yeah, I agree with Supervisor Mitchoff. The only comments to think about that really aren't in the staff report, one is these sections are not in Measure J. Sometimes they're buried in an ordinance, and we put it in here, and that's one of the decisions we'll have to make. Is it in the expenditure plan itself, just from a transparency point of view? And then some of the suggestions are beefed up from what's in Measure J. So that's really would have been the tone of the discussion. And some of the specific points or some of the discussion happened yesterday at your meeting about governance structure, considering adding some rotation in there for the Board of Supervisors, really changing the Citizens Advisory Committee into an oversight committee with some teeth and some broader representation. So, yeah, it's all in the staff report, but those are really the kind of comments we're looking for. Ultimately, is in the TEP, do we want this additional accountability and transparency? And then governing structure proposes some changes, and then there's some other changes that aren't in here that we'll likely hear about.
Through the
Commissioner
chair.
Arnerich and then Commissioner Taylor. Okay, Commissioner Taylor.
First of all, through the chair, I'd like to find out, if possible, you might have some speaker cards that people did come and yes, on that, and they might not be able to actually make it to the next meeting or whatever. Could we take the comments? Would that be appropriate?
I just had a quick comment. I just want us to keep in mind about we come out with 2 measures. They coexist for a long time. I'm really concerned. This is sort of another layer. We have an oversight system put in place now. I don't want that to go away. I think it's worked well. To come up with a new one, find a way that we can deal with what those issues are. But if we create a different governance, these meetings, we'll be having 2 meetings. We'll have to have one set of rules and another, and then you're going to have two oversights because we have an oversight requirement in Measure J. So as much as we want to change and make it harder and tougher, and I understand some people doing that, let's really, think, what is the purpose of the oversight? Is there something we need to tweak in what we have now to make it respond better?
Yeah.
And if so, then maybe we ought to consider it for both, not just unilateral.
Just real quick, I think that most of the issues that's been identified, or those are language or where that information is inconsistent. And so it's a cleanup effort, I think, more so than anything else, is to make sure that the language is very consistent and that the language is in all documents that's put out as it relates to the urban limit line. And therefore, I think you clean it up, because in terms of whether we want to make any changes, it's worked. It hasn't been an issue. And those communities that have not wanted to live by the urban limit line rules, they went out and got voter approval for their own line. And that's still an opportunity for folks to do. So.
So far on items 1.4 and 1.5, Stephen Smith. And if you can come back next week, you can hold your comment until then.
Okay, on agenda item 1.4, I have watched the developments on this issue with great interest and more than a little trepidation. Having watched the amount of time invested in this TEP process by so many, my personal opinion is it would be tragic if lines in the sand were drawn that could not be bridged by compromise. I have a few points to make as a highly informed observer of the authority since 2006, including service on the Citizens Advisory Committee since 2009. First is the utter absurdity of any one-size-fits-all approach. I am a resident of Brentwood. My city has a very robust agricultural land preservation program in process. It does not have, nor does it need, a hillside preservation ordinance. I was for several years a resident of Orinda, where the exact opposite applies. There's a whole spectrum of needs among the various cities. The entire structure of this authority recognizes and is built on the varying needs of the various subregions in our county. I see a new case having been made that the 30-acre year rule has been abused. In my city, the urban limit line, when opposed, resulted in an absurd situation in western Brentwood, which continues to put hundreds of school children and their parents at serious risk every school day. If a small adjustment in the urban limit line in this area remains possible, we might be able to resolve this situation. I do believe that there's room for compromise in the areas of adding required findings, including reviewing the status of infill development, a limit on sequential applications of the 30-acre exemption, and several other items listed in the staff report. A final observation on the role of compromise in governance. When you adopt an all-or-nothing approach, you incur a substantial probability of receiving nothing. Do you want me to go on to my comments on 1.5? Or
if you do, go ahead.
Okay, it'd be fairly quick. But it's a whole new topic. As I've mentioned before, I have been a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee since 2009 and have chaired the committee for the past 3 years. I agree that transitioning the Citizens Advisory Committee into a Citizens Oversight Committee with expanded responsibilities makes a good deal of sense. I have observed that the base workload of the Citizens Advisory Committee is very cyclic, mostly being tied to the review of growth management program checklists as they become available. It also appears to me that peak financial governance issues generally come to the fore at times when checklist review is at an ebb. Ever since the requirement to file Form 700 was imposed on CAC members, we have had difficulties in attracting and retaining members. I feel then and feel now that this was an overreach based on overly conservative legal reasoning. I strongly counsel that the charter of the Citizens Oversight Committee place it clearly outside the path of direct influence on the Authority Board's legislative powers, and that no Form 700 requirement be opposed. Indeed, I personally regard the imposition of a Form 700 requirement at odds with the very nature of a Citizens Oversight Committee, as it adds an unnecessary hurdle to citizen participation. Thank you.
There are other speakers, Steve Barr. I'll reserve my comments next week. Okay. So the other thing we have on our agenda is given how much progress we've made tonight or not, do we want to schedule a meeting during the third week of March?
I think we should.
That's what I warned about when we first talked about this. I have a rigorous travel schedule, and I built it around the fact that we have these meetings. So that we have an alternate, and he'll have to show up if you're doing it that night. Let's see. I have a city council meeting on the Monday night, traveling Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Friday night is Good Friday.
Okay, I think that was enough. All right, so for the others of us, you'll still be back on for the 29th. So for the others, does the 23rd work? Hearing. So we already have the 16th. Now we're adding the 23rd, and we already have the 29th, which is a Tuesday, remember? Right, so we're adding one on the 16th. All right, so with that, thank you, everybody, and we're adjourned, and look for your packet, which will probably be out on Friday.